Ethan, you're too expensive to save. We have to think about the family. Those words didn't come from a stranger or an enemy. They came from my father, Harold Walker, standing at the foot of my hospital bed, with a folder of bills under his arm, like he was about to fire an employee at his garage. I was 20 years old, tubes running from my arms, the fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Medical Center buzzing overhead. My throat was raw from the biopsy. My body was weak from the first round of chemo. But nothing hit harder than those words. My name is Ethan Walker. Before all this, I was an apprentice carpenter in Topeka, Kansas. My hands were rough, my jeans always covered in sawdust. I was learning how to frame houses, build cabinets, carve something permanent out of raw wood. I loved the smell of cedar in the mornings, and the way my boss, Mr. Harlan, said I had a steady eye and a craftsman's patience. I thought my future was mapped out: a small house, steady work, maybe marriage by 25. Then the headaches came like nails being driven behind my eyes. By the time I collapsed on a job site, the doctors said the words no one wants to hear: Hodgkin's lymphoma. Stage 2. That morning in room 407, I had thought my family came to support me. My mother Martha was by the window, twisting her wedding ring round and round on her finger. My older brother Scott sat with his phone angled away, scrolling through property listings, as if nothing in the room concerned him. My grandmother Agnes clutched her rosary so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had driven in before dawn, still in her housecoat, because she believed family meant showing up when it mattered. My father spread the bills across the rolling tray in front of me: insurance statements, hospital invoices, highlighted columns of numbers. He tapped each page with his grease-stained fingers like he was tallying car repairs. $300,000 minimum, he said, voice flat. That's before complications. If the treatment fails, we lose the house, the garage, Scott's career, your mother's retirement. I stared at him, waiting for a crack in his voice, some sign he didn't mean it. Instead, he pulled his phone from his pocket, opened the calculator app, and began punching in figures while I lay there fighting tears. Dad, I croaked, my throat raw, I'm your son. He didn't look at me. And Scott is my son. Martha is my wife. 1 life against 3. Sometimes you have to make hard choices. It was my grandmother who broke the silence. Harold. He's not a number, she cried, stepping forward. He's your boy. But he didn't flinch. My mother turned her face to the wall, whispering, Your father's right. That was the moment I understood. In their eyes, I wasn't Ethan Walker, apprentice, carpenter, grandson, son, brother. I was a liability, an expense too great to bear. And the room grew colder than any Kansas winter I'd ever known. When the door closed that morning, it wasn't just the sound of my family leaving. It was the sound of a world collapsing. I lay in that hospital bed, the chemo drip ticking away like a cruel clock, and realized my father had turned my life into a line item on a balance sheet. By noon, their phones went straight to voicemail. By evening, the numbers had been disconnected. Within a week, they had moved from our house in Topeka without leaving me an address. It was as if the Walkers had never had a younger son at all. I thought the silence would be temporary. I told myself Dad would come back the next morning, that Mom would sneak in with her famous banana bread, like she used to when I had the flu. I kept glancing at the door, expecting Scott to wander in with some awkward joke about interest rates or housing deals. But the only people who came were nurses with polite smiles and trays of food I couldn't keep down. The hardest part wasn't the pain. It was the knowing. Knowing that the people who should have loved me most decided my survival wasn't worth the mortgage on Maple Street. I wasn't just sick. I was erased. Then came Rachel, my girlfriend since junior year. She walked in 3 days after my family disappeared, clutching a tote bag against her chest. Her eyes were red, her hands trembling. For a second, hope surged through me. Surely she was here to stay. "Ethan," she whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Your dad came to talk to mine." I frowned, my heart sinking. "About what?" She bit her lip so hard it bled. He said staying with you would ruin my life, that the debt would crush us before we even had a chance. "Rachel." My voice cracked. "Do you love me?" She looked at me then, tears streaking her face, and whispered the line that still haunts me. "Love doesn't pay the bills." She kissed my forehead, left the tote bag with a sweatshirt and a pack of gum, and walked out. Just like my family, she never came back. That night the despair was so thick I could taste it metallic and bitter in the back of my throat. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting each square again and again because it was easier than facing the emptiness inside me. For the first time, I understood how someone could simply stop fighting, stop breathing, and let go. The next morning, Pastor John from the hospital chapel appeared in my doorway. He was a kind man in his 60s, with silver hair and a Bible tucked under his arm. He stood there a long time watching me. I wanted him to step closer to sit down and tell me that God hadn't abandoned me, even if my family had. Instead, he cleared his throat and said softly, "Ethan, I'll keep you in my prayers before turning away." The words were meant to comfort, but they landed like another rejection. Even the shepherds of faith kept their distance, as though my suffering was contagious. I wasn't just abandoned by blood, I was abandoned by community. That afternoon, I asked the nurse to close the blinds. I didn't want to see the sun. The world outside kept spinning cars, honking kids, laughing, life moving forward, while I was trapped in a sterile room chained to an IV pole, left behind by everyone I thought I could count on. I was 20 years old, riddled with cancer, and utterly alone. And in that silence, darker than any night, I began to wonder if my father had been right. Maybe I wasn't worth saving. I had convinced myself no one else would come. After my family vanished, and Rachel walked away, the empty chair beside my bed became a monument to what I'd lost. For days, I refused to look at it, because hope hurt worse than the chemo. Then one afternoon, as the IV beeped steadily, and the smell of disinfectant clung to the air, a woman filled that chair. She wasn't wearing a white coat or a clerical collar. She came in with a battered leather satchel and a thermos of coffee, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. "Ethan Walker," she asked, her voice low, but certain. "Yes," I rasped, wondering if she was here to tell me about another bill. She smiled, not pitying, just steady. "My name is Caroline Brooks. I'm a social worker here at St. Mary's. And before you roll your eyes, I'm also a survivor. Breast cancer, 20 years ago." She tugged her sleeve up, showing a faint scar that peeked above her wrist. I stared at her. No one had come into my room voluntarily in weeks, not unless they were paid to adjust my IV. "Why are you here?" I asked. "Because I heard what happened," she said bluntly. "About your family, about the girl, about Pastor John standing in your doorway like he didn't know what to say. And I know what it feels like to be left for dead." Her words sliced through me, raw and precise. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "You can lie here and let them be right, or you can get up and prove them wrong. That choice belongs to you, not to them." Something in me cracked the wall I'd built to keep the pain from spilling out. My eyes burned, and for the first time in weeks, I let myself cry in front of another person. She didn't look away. She just handed me a box of tissues, and let me break. When I could finally breathe again, Caroline pulled a folder from her satchel. It wasn't filled with invoices or cold calculations like my father's. It was stuffed with pamphlets and handwritten notes. There are foundations that cover treatment for young patients, charities that pay medical debt, programs that give jobs you can do from bed data entry, transcription tutoring. You are not out of options, Ethan. I shook my head. Even if I survive, I'll be drowning in debt. Who would want to live like that? She reached into her bag again, and this time she placed a small leather journal on my tray. Its cover was worn smooth, the kind of object someone had carried for years. Write, she said firmly. Every day. Anger, fear, gratitude, nonsense. I don't care. Someday these words will save you. They saved me. Her voice didn't waver. She didn't offer false comfort. She offered tools and the terrifying belief that maybe, just maybe, I was worth saving. That night when the ward grew quiet, I opened the journal. The first sentence I scrawled, hand-shaking, was the only thing I could manage. I am still here. And for the first time since my father's verdict, I almost believed it. Caroline's journal sat on the tray like a lifeline. I didn't know it then, but those empty pages would become my anchor. I started with a sentence, then another, and soon the scribbles grew into a record of the days I refused to give up. But belief alone didn't pay hospital bills. Caroline was right. I needed more than hope. I needed work. So while poison dripped into my veins, I opened a laptop borrowed from the hospital's lost and found and took on whatever jobs I could. Data entry at $10 an hour. Medical transcription for a clinic 2 states away. Math tutoring for high school kids who didn't know the boy. Coaching them fractions was hooked up to an IV. My hands trembled. My vision blurred, but every keystroke felt like a small rebellion. Chemo stripped weight from me until my jeans slid down my hips. My hair fell out in the shower like wet leaves clinging to the drain. Some mornings I couldn't keep down a sip of water, yet at night I worked until my fingers cramped. Each dollar earned was proof I wasn't the expense my father claimed. One evening, after another round that left me shaking, I heard a faint giggle through the thin curtain dividing my room from the next. That's how I met Nora. She was 9, with big brown eyes, and a smile too bright for the IV pole she dragged like a reluctant puppy. Her heart was failing her, but her imagination never did. "Do you know any stories?" she whispered across the curtain. I hesitated, then told her one about a carpenter who built a castle out of scrap wood. She laughed so hard the monitors beeped, and from then on every night I invented tales until we both fell asleep. She called me Story Man. I called her my little oak tree because she refused to fall no matter the storm. And then there was Sam. Samuel Hargrove was the night janitor, the kind of man people rarely noticed. Gray uniform, mop bucket, quiet footsteps. At first I thought he was just passing through, but I began to notice the small things, a pack of crackers left on my nightstand, my laptop charger fixed with electrical tape, and a paper clip. The way he lingered a little longer when my pain made me grip the rail until my knuckles turned white. He never said much, just a grunt of greeting or a nod. But one night, as I sat hunched over my keyboard, fighting nausea, he stopped and said the longest sentence I'd ever heard from him. "You're tougher than most men I've seen in this ward. Don't forget that." It wasn't a sermon or a pep talk, but those words carried more weight than any prayer I'd been offered. By day, I fought the disease. By night, I worked jobs meant for healthy men, and in between I told fairy tales to a little girl with a broken heart. And through it all, Sam's quiet presence reminded me sometimes the people who matter most aren't the ones who share your blood, but the ones who show up when everyone else walks away. Remission came quietly, like a whisper I almost didn't believe. 16 months after the first chemo drip, a doctor looked at me over her glasses and said, "No active signs of cancer." I should have felt free, but instead I felt crushed. The cancer was gone, yes, but the debt remained a mountain I had to climb alone. $200,000. That number followed me everywhere, louder than my heartbeat. I left St. Mary's with a duffel bag, a folder of medical bills, and the leather journal Caroline had given me. Home was no longer Maple Street. My family had seen to that. So I found a studio above a laundromat in Jefferson City, Missouri. The rent was cheap because the walls were thin and the ceiling leaked when it rained. The constant thrum of washing machines became my lullaby. Every day blurred into the next. Mornings started at 4:30, throwing newspapers onto porches in the dark, my breath fogging in the winter air. Afternoons I stocked shelves at a 24-hour grocery store. Evenings I delivered takeout in a borrowed car that smelled like fried onions. Nights I logged into freelance sites, typing until my fingers ached. Instant ramen with a cracked egg stirred in became dinner. My hands, once proud of carving cedar and oak, now shook from exhaustion, not craftsmanship. I told myself this was living. But really, it was survival. One January night, I came home from a double shift, collapsed on the narrow staircase to my attic apartment, and didn't move. My chest burned. My vision went black around the edges. I thought, so this is how it ends, not with cancer, but with exhaustion. When I woke, I was in the ER again. An oxygen mask pressed against my face, monitors chirped, and a nurse scolded me like I was her own son. "You can't keep this pace, honey. You'll drop dead." It was Mrs. Dunlap, my 75-year-old neighbor from the apartment below, who had saved me. She was a widow who baked pies for the laundromat workers and hummed gospel hymns while folding her sheets. That night she'd heard me collapse and called 911. Later, she leaned over my hospital bed and wagged her finger. "You think you're invincible, Ethan Walker, but even mules need rest. God didn't pull you through cancer so you could kill yourself with work." I laughed weakly, but her words stuck. Back in my attic room, I opened Caroline's journal. The pages were thick with ink, now rage, gratitude, despair, fragments of fairy tales I'd made up for Nora. On the nightstand taped above the flickering lamp, I kept the first sentence I had ever written in it. I am still here. Every time I felt like quitting, I forced myself to read those 4 words. Some nights I stared at them until dawn. I was alive, yes, but the shadows of debt, loneliness, and exhaustion followed me everywhere. I wondered how much longer I could carry them before they crushed me for good. I thought the rest of my life would be a quiet grind, work, debt, ramen, repeat. That attic room above the laundromat felt like the end of my story. But then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the door, crisp and confident. It was a Tuesday night, and I'd just set a pot of noodles to boil on my hot plate. I almost didn't answer. Strangers didn't come to my door, and bill collectors didn't bother climbing 3 flights of creaky stairs for someone who could barely scrape rent. But something in that knock felt different, almost deliberate. When I opened the door, a man in a tailored gray suit stood in the dim hallway. His shoes shined brighter than anything in my apartment, and his leather briefcase looked out of place against the peeling paint. "Mr. Ethan Walker?" he asked, his voice steady, almost kind. "Yes," I said cautiously. "My name is Richard Alden. I'm an attorney. May I come in?" I laughed bitterly. "Unless you're here to repossess my broken microwave, you've got the wrong guy." But he didn't flinch. He stepped inside, glancing around the bare room. The mattress on the floor, the milk crates stacked as shelves, the single lamp flickering. He didn't show pity, only respect, as though the place didn't surprise him. He set the briefcase on my wobbly card table and clicked it open. "I'm here regarding an inheritance," he said. "Specifically yours." I froze. "Inheritance? I don't have a family." He gave the faintest smile. "Not by blood, perhaps, but by choice." From his case, he drew out a set of documents stamped with seals, then a small black notebook and a brass key. He placed them gently in front of me. "Samuel Hargrove left his entire estate to you. $64 million. The noodles boiled over hissing on the hot plate. My laugh came out hollow. "Sam." "The janitor." Richard nodded. "Not just a janitor, Mr. Hargrove was a quiet man. Yes, but he held 17 patents in medical technology, chemotherapy pumps, infusion devices. He lived simply, but he was a millionaire many times over. And in his will, he named you." I shook my head, my chest tight. "That doesn't make sense. Perhaps this will." Richard slid the worn notebook across the table. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside page after page of Sam's handwriting, shaky but determined. The boy worked even when his body gave out. He tutors children from his hospital bed. He tells stories to the little girl next door so she won't cry herself to sleep. His family abandoned him, but he keeps fighting. He doesn't know his worth, but I do. Tears blurred the words. The brass key glinted under the lamplight. Richard explained it opened a safety deposit box, Sam's last request. He wanted you to know someone saw you. Someone believed you were worth every fight, every scar. For the first time in years, I felt the floor shift beneath me, not from loss, but from possibility. Sam had mopped hospital floors at midnight, and all the while he was watching me, recording me, choosing me. And in that moment, $64 million meant less than 6 words written in his hand. You were always worth saving. The news spread faster than I could breathe. 1 week after Richard Alden's visit, headlines began circling local papers and TV stations. Former cancer patient inherits $64 million from reclusive inventor. They didn't use Sam's name, but they used mine. And in a town like Topeka, that was enough. The first call came on a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. "Ethan." A familiar voice cracked through the line. "My mother. It's your father and me. We need to see you." 2 days later, they showed up at my building. Harold in a pressed shirt, Martha clutching her purse like it might shield her from the shame. Scott was with them, suit still sharp, but his eyes darted around nervously, as if calculating my square footage, my worth. When I opened the door, they stared at me like I was a stranger. "Son," my father began, his voice low. "We made a mistake, a mistake." I stepped back, letting them inside the tiny apartment. The smell of detergent from the laundromat below seeped through the walls. "Is that what you call it? Leaving me in a hospital bed to die?" My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We were scared, Ethan. The bills, the debt. It was too much. We didn't know what else to do." Scott chimed in quickly. "You have to understand it wasn't personal. It was survival. But blood is blood. We're still family." I felt heat rise in my chest. Memories flashing, the folder of bills, the cold words, my father's calculator clicking while I begged him to see me. "You said I was too expensive to save?" I said, my voice trembling. "You told me 1 life against 3 wasn't worth it. You turned your back and never looked back. Don't stand here now and talk about family." For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Then from the corner, a voice I hadn't expected cut through like a blade. It was Grandma Agnes. She had come with them, but unlike the others, she didn't flinch when I looked at her. She stepped forward, leaning on her cane, and pointed a trembling finger at Harold. Don't you dare call this boy family after what you did. You forfeited that right the day you left him in that hospital? Harold's jaw tightened, but she didn't stop. Her voice grew stronger, filled with the kind of authority only age and love can carry. I watched you walk out that door, Harold. I watched my grandson beg you with tears in his eyes, and I said nothing because I was too weak then. But not today. Today I stand with him. Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't look away. For once, I wasn't the boy abandoned in a hospital bed. I was a man who had survived with the proof of my worth written in Sam's hand, not theirs. And as my parents stood there in silence, the twist of fate was clear. They had come back for money. But what they wanted most, the right to call me son, was something they would never have again. When the door closed on my parents and brother, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace, not triumph, not bitterness, just peace. For so long, I had craved their approval, their presence, their love. But in that moment, I realized I didn't need it anymore. The people who mattered had already shown me what family really was. Sam's notebook sat on my desk, its worn cover a reminder that someone saw me when no one else did. Inside were pages filled with his handwriting notes about my fight, about my stubbornness, about the boy he believed was worth more than any number on a spreadsheet. Next to it lay his old janitor's badge, still scratched from years of swiping into locked hallways. To anyone else, it was just a piece of plastic. To me, it was a medal. Proof that a man with a mop and a quiet smile had changed my life more than anyone who shared my blood. With Richard Alden's guidance, I took a portion of Sam's estate and created the Hargrove Foundation. Not for me, for the ones left behind in hospital rooms, with no one sitting by their bed. For the young man counting ceiling tiles at midnight because his father called him too expensive to save. For the little girl who only wanted someone to tell her a story before the machines lulled her to sleep. The first checks we cut went to cover overdue bills for patients at St. Mary's. One by one, I watched the weight lift from their shoulders. A single mother with stage 3 breast cancer who'd been threatened with eviction. A Vietnam vet battling leukemia, his pension swallowed by hospital fees. A teenager whose parents left the state rather than pay his dialysis. Their relief was raw humbling. And every time I thought of Sam, how he sat beside me at my lowest and believed in a future I couldn't see. Caroline came to the opening of the foundation. She hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. "You did it, Ethan," she whispered. "You proved them wrong." Nora, now stronger after her surgery, brought me a drawing she'd made, the two of us sitting under a big oak tree smiling. And Grandma Agnes, my fiercest defender, stood proudly in the front row, her eyes glistening, as if she'd been waiting her whole life to see her grandson recognized. One evening after the crowd had gone and the office grew quiet, I sat alone at the desk. The lamplight fell across the photograph I kept close, me Caroline, Nora, and Agnes all together, smiling. Not blood, but family. The kind that stayed. The kind that fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. I traced the edge of Sam's badge with my thumb and whispered, "Thank you." Family isn't defined by DNA or last names written on birth certificates. Family is the people who stay when everyone else walks away. And thanks to Sam, thanks to Caroline, thanks to those who believed, I finally understood I had never been alone. Not really. And now no one else would have to be either. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part moved you the most? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Let's see how far our community reaches. Don't forget to hit subscribe and join us here on Domestic Tragedy for more powerful stories that stay with you long after they end.